The twin suns of Vexus Prime beat down like molten hammers on the cracked salt flats of the shattered expanse, turning the air into a shimmering furnace that swallowed sound and sanity alike. Dust devils spiraled in the distance, ghostly dancers in a land that had long forgotten mercy. In the center of this desolation, two armies stood frozen. Not in fear, but in the brittle tension of a ceasefire that felt more fragile than glass under a boot heel. On one side, the ragged remnants of the Terran Expeditionary Force, their armor scorched and patched, their faces etched with exhaustion and the kind of grim humor that only comes after surviving too much. On the other, the crystalline phalanx of the Velari Ascendancy. Tall, elegant, and utterly lethal, their white skin gleaming like polished alabaster beneath the glare, their long white hair flowing like frozen silk in the hot wind. At their head stood Commander Vera Solin, her eyes the color of storm-churned ice, her armor forged from living moonstone that pulsed faintly with every breath she took. She held her plasma glaive not in threat, but readiness, like a dancer waiting for the music to resume. Opposite her, boots sinking slightly into the fine, bone-dry dust, stood Commander Joran Vale of the Terran Alliance. He wasn't handsome in the classical sense. His face was too lean, his nose slightly crooked from an old bar fight on Mars Station, and his dark hair was cropped short enough to reveal the scar that ran from temple to jawline. But there was a spark in his brown eyes, a flicker of irreverence that refused to be extinguished even in the face of annihilation. His uniform was stained with oil and blood that wasn't his, and the insignia on his shoulder was frayed at the edges. They'd been locked in a brutal stalemate for 3 cycles now, each side too battered to press an advantage, too proud to retreat. Negotiations had been terse, technical, and utterly devoid of warmth. Until today, Joran had come alone, as per the fragile truce, to discuss the withdrawal of Velari scout units from the eastern salt flats, a region rumored to hold ancient geothermal vents that both sides desperately needed for power. He'd expected cold logic, sharp demands, maybe a veiled threat wrapped in poetic metaphor, which the Velari were fond of. What he hadn't expected was the way the wind caught Vera's hair just then, sending strands across her face like silver threads against snow, or how the harsh light softened around her when she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. And in that moment, absurdity bloomed in Joran's chest like a desert flower after a rare rain. Wild, illogical, and impossible to ignore. "So," he said, voice rough from dust and dehydration, but with a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "If we can't agree on borders, how about a merger?" He paused, letting the silence stretch taut. Then, with a theatrical bow that made his stiff joints protest, he added, "Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air like a dropped grenade. Behind him, one of his lieutenants choked on his own spit. Among the Velari ranks, a collective intake of breath hissed like steam escaping a cracked pipe. Even the wind seemed to still. Joran braced himself for outrage. A plasma bolt to the chest, a scathing rebuke in that melodic but razor-sharp tongue of hers, maybe even a declaration of renewed hostilities. He'd meant it as a joke, of course, a stupid, reckless, utterly human attempt to cut through the ice with laughter. He'd used humor like a shield his whole life, especially when things got too real, too close. And this silent, statuesque warrior woman with eyes that could freeze lava was dangerously close to being real. But Vera didn't strike. She didn't sneer. Instead, she took a single step forward, the moonstone plates of her armor chiming softly like distant bells. Her expression didn't change, but something in her gaze shifted. Less like a predator assessing prey, more like a scholar encountering an unexpected variable in a long-solved equation. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the faintest curve touched her lips. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "In the old tongue of my ancestors," she said, her voice low and resonant, like wind through crystal caves. "To propose marriage in the shadow of war is not jest. It is a binding oath, a vow to lay down arms and forge a new lineage from the ashes of conflict." She tilted her head again, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. "You understand this, human?" Joran's grin faltered. His mouth went dry, not from the heat, but from the sudden weight of his own words. He'd thrown out a punchline, and it had landed in sacred ground. He cleared his throat, glancing back at his men, who were staring at him like he'd grown a second head. "I was just trying to lighten the mood?" Vera's eyes narrowed slightly, but the ghost of amusement remained. "Your species is strange. You speak death with one breath and courtship with the next." She took another step, closing the distance until only a few paces separated them. Up close, he could see the fine tracery of silver veins beneath her skin, pulsing faintly in time with her armor. But perhaps strangeness is what this war needs. She turned slightly, gesturing toward the eastern flats with her glaive. The vents you seek, they are not merely power sources. They are the heartwells of my people. Sacred. To allow your machines near them would be sacrilege. Joran's shoulders slumped. So much for the joke. Back to square one. Then we're at an impasse, he said, voice flat now. Not necessarily, Vera replied, her gaze locking onto his once more. There is an old rite. The trial of twin sons. 2 champions, one from each side, enter the Heartwell Caverns at dawn. They must retrieve a shard of the core crystal and return before the second sun sets. If both survive and succeed, a pact is forged. If one fails, the victor claims the right to the land. She paused, her storm-gray eyes glinting. But if the champions are bound by oath, by marriage, the pact becomes eternal. The lands, the resources, the futures, shared. Joran stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't just a negotiation anymore. It was a gamble wrapped in myth and sealed with a vow he'd made as a joke. You're serious, he said slowly. I do not jest in matters of blood and stone, she replied. Behind him, his second-in-command, a grizzled veteran named Wren, muttered, Sir, with all due respect, are you actually considering this? Joran didn't answer. He looked at Vera, really looked, past the alien beauty, past the warrior's poise. He saw something else. Weariness. Not the physical kind, but the deeper fatigue of endless conflict, of carrying the weight of her people's survival. He recognized it because he carried the same weight. And maybe, just maybe, her offer wasn't just strategy. Maybe it was hope disguised as ritual. All right, Joran said, squaring his shoulders. I'll do it. A murmur rippled through both armies. Vera's expression remained unreadable, but her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her glaive. Then the rites begin at dawn, she said. You will need more than courage, human. The Heartwells are alive. They test not just strength, but truth. That night, in the makeshift command tent that smelled of ozone and stale coffee, Joran couldn't sleep. Wren had tried to talk him out of it. You barely know her, sir. She could be setting you up. This whole thing could be a trap. But Joran kept seeing the way Vera had looked at him. Not with contempt, not with calculation, but with something closer to curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, recognition. At dawn, they met again at the mouth of the caverns. A jagged fissure in the salt flats that exhaled warm, mineral-scented air. Vera wore no armor now, only a simple tunic of woven starlight fibers that shimmered faintly. In her hand, she held not her glaive, but a slender dagger with a hilt shaped like intertwined hands. She offered it to him. This is the oath blade, she said. If we both return, we each cut our palm and let our blood mingle on the core shard. The bond is sealed. Joran took the blade. It was lighter than it looked, humming faintly against his skin. And if one of us doesn't make it back, then the other walks out alone, she said simply. And the war continues. They entered the caverns together, the light fading quickly behind them. The walls glowed with bioluminescent fungi, casting eerie blue-green shadows that danced like spirits. The air grew warmer, thicker, humming with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated in Joran's bones. They walked in silence for a time, boots crunching on crystalline gravel. Why did you say yes? Vera asked suddenly, her voice echoing softly. Joran glanced at her. To your marriage thing? Honestly, I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. Still do, kinda. She didn't look offended. Yet you agreed. Because I'm tired, he admitted. Tired of fighting over rocks and vents and lines on a map. Tired of watching good people die for reasons that sound noble in speeches but feel hollow in the dirt. He paused, choosing his words carefully. And because you didn't laugh at me, you took my stupid joke and turned it into something real. That's rare. Vera was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly he almost missed it. My people believe that laughter in the face of despair is the first sign of a soul worth saving. The path ahead split into 3 tunnels, each pulsing with a different colored light, red, blue, and gold. The Heartwell chooses the trial, Vera said. We must each take a path. Only one leads to the core. Joran frowned. We're splitting up? It is the way, she said. The caverns test the heart. They show you what you fear most and what you desire. He wanted to argue, to insist they stay together, but something in her tone told him this wasn't negotiable. With a nod, he chose the red-lit tunnel. Vera took the blue. As he stepped forward, the entrance sealed behind him with a soft click, leaving him in near darkness, the red light casting long, bloody shadows. What followed was less a physical journey and more a waking nightmare. The tunnel twisted and turned, walls shifting like living flesh. Visions assaulted him, memories of fallen comrades, faces he hadn't let himself mourn, voices whispering accusations. You led them to die. You joke because you're afraid to feel. He stumbled, gasping, sweat stinging his eyes. At one point, he saw Vera standing before him, her white hair stained red, her eyes accusing. You broke your oath, she said, voice cold. You used words like toys. No, he gasped, reaching for her. I didn't mean, but she dissolved into smoke. He pressed on, driven by sheer stubbornness and the memory of her ghost smile in the desert sun. Hours blurred together. Thirst clawed at his throat, doubt gnawed at his resolve. But then, deep in the heart of the mountain, he saw it, a pulsing golden light, the core shard, floating in a pool of liquid light, humming with ancient power. He reached for it and the ground gave way. He fell into darkness, landing hard on a stone ledge. Below him, a chasm yawned, filled with swirling mist. And there, on the opposite ledge, stood Vera, clutching her own shard, her face pale but determined. Their eyes met across the abyss. The caverns lied, she called, her voice strained. There is no bridge, only sacrifice. Joran's heart pounded. What kind of sacrifice? One must stay, she said, to anchor the other's return. The heartwell demands balance. He stared at her, horror dawning. No, there's got to be another way. There isn't, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Take my shard. Go. Like hell I will, Joran snapped. He scanned the chasm, mind racing. Then he saw it. A thin, nearly invisible thread of crystal stretching from his ledge to hers, vibrating faintly. A bridge, but only for one, and only if they moved together. Vera, he called. Trust me. She hesitated, then nodded. They stepped onto the thread at the same time, shards held high. The crystal bridge flared with light, humming in harmony with their steps. Halfway across, the thread began to crack. Faster, Joran yelled. They lunged for the far ledge just as the bridge shattered behind them. They collapsed in a heap, shards clattering to the stone. For a moment, they just lay there, breathing hard, hearts hammering in unison. You're heavier than you look, Vera muttered, pushing herself up. And you're bosier than you seem. Joran shot back, grinning despite everything. She looked at him, really looked, and this time she smiled. Not a ghost, but a real, full smile that lit up her storm-gray eyes like sunlight through ice. Perhaps we are both full of surprises. They emerged from the caverns just as the second sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in violent streaks of orange and purple. Their armies waited in tense silence. When they saw both champions walking side by side, shards glowing in their hands, a collective gasp rose from the ranks. Vera turned to Joran, drawing the oath blade. Without a word, she sliced her palm and held it out. He did the same. Their blood, his crimson, hers a startling silver blue, mingled on the core shard, which flared with blinding light before settling into a soft, steady pulse. A murmur spread through the Velari ranks, then a cheer. On the Terran side, confusion turned to cautious relief, then hesitant applause. Ren clapped Joran on the back so hard he nearly fell over. You crazy son of a... he began, then stopped, shaking his head with a disbelieving laugh. But as the celebration began, Joran felt a strange unease. The shard in his hand was warm, almost alive, and deep in the caverns behind them, something stirred. A presence older than either of their civilizations, watching, waiting. The pact was sealed, yes, but the Heartwell had given them more than a truce. It had given them a purpose, and purpose, Joran knew, was never simple. Vera touched his arm, her fingers cool against his sunburned skin. The hard part begins now, she said quietly. He nodded, looking out at the mingling armies. Enemies moments ago, now bound by an oath spoken in jest and sealed in blood. Yeah, he said, but at least we won't be doing it alone. And as the twin suns vanished and the first stars pricked the violet sky, the desert held its breath. Not in anticipation of war, but of something far more dangerous, far more fragile, peace. In the days that followed their emergence from the Hartwell Caverns, the fragile truce between the Terran Expeditionary Force and the Velari Ascendancy hardened into something resembling uneasy coexistence, but not without friction. The mingling of blood on the core shard had forged more than a political pact. It had awakened something ancient within the geothermal network beneath the shattered expanse. Geysers of iridescent vapor erupted at irregular intervals, and the salt flats began to hum with a low, resonant frequency that made teeth ache and dreams restless. Both sides attributed it to the land, accepting the bond. But Joran wasn't so sure. He'd seen the way the core shard pulsed when Vera held it, like a heart recognizing its twin. And he'd felt it too, a strange warmth in his chest whenever she was near, as if his own blood remembered hers. They set up a joint encampment near the cavern mouth, a patchwork of Terran prefab shelters and Velari crystalline tents that shimmered like frozen breath. At first, interactions were stiff, Terrans eyeing the Velari's elegant movements with suspicion, Velari recoiling from the humans' loud laughter and crude slang. But necessity bred proximity. Water purifiers broke down. Velari engineers, with their intuitive grasp of harmonic resonance, fixed them in minutes. A sandstorm buried half the camp. Terran drones mapped safe zones while Velari scouts used echolocation chants to guide lost patrols home. Slowly, grudgingly, respect took root. Joran and Vera spent most evenings together, not by design but by gravity. They'd sit on a ridge overlooking the flats, the twin moons casting silver shadows across the salt, and talk. Not about strategy or treaties, but about things that mattered. What home felt like, what they missed, what scared them. Vera confessed that her people had once been nomads, wandering the stars in great sky vessels before settling on Vexus Prime centuries ago. She'd never seen snow, only the endless white of her own hair and skin. Joran told her about Earth's oceans, how the waves sounded like 1,000 whispers, how you could stand on a beach and feel small in the best way. Once, on a whim, he mimicked the cry of a seagull. Vera stared at him for a full 10 seconds before bursting into laughter. A sound so rare and bright it startled a flock of night-winged skitters from the rocks below. But the growing bond between them didn't go unnoticed. Among the Velari elders, whispers spread like frost across glass. She has been swayed by human sentiment. One elder hissed during a council held beneath the twin moons. The oath was meant to be symbolic, not intimate. And on the Terran side, Ren pulled Joran aside one morning, his face grim. Sir, some of the men are saying you've gone native, that you're letting your feelings cloud your judgment. Joran had wanted to snap back, but the truth was, he was different. He caught himself watching Vera when she thought no one was looking. The way her fingers traced the edge of her glaive when she was thinking, how she hummed old Velari lullabies under her breath while calibrating sensors. He'd never felt this seen, this known, not even among his own kind. Then came the first twist. A distress signal crackled over the comms one night, short, distorted, but unmistakably Terran. It came from the ruins of Outpost Theta, a forward base abandoned weeks earlier after a brutal Velari raid. Joran recognized the voice. Lieutenant Mara Cho, one of his oldest friends, presumed dead. Against Vera's protests, he assembled a small rescue team. It could be a trap, she warned, her eyes sharp with concern. The ruins are unstable, and my people do not revisit battlefields lightly. I have to try, he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then I go with you. The ruins were a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered permacrete, half buried in the ever-shifting dunes. They found Mara in a collapsed command bunker, half delirious from dehydration and a festering wound on her leg. But her eyes lit up when she saw Joran. Knew you'd come, she rasped. Then she saw Vera behind him, and her expression hardened. You brought her. The tension in the bunker thickened like clotting blood. Mara refused Vera's help, spitting out Terran medgel instead of accepting the Velari healing salve. On the journey back, she whispered to Joran, Don't trust her, Joran. They're using you. That marriage. It's just a ploy to control the Hartwells. He wanted to dismiss it as fevered paranoia, but doubt, once planted, was hard to uproot. Back at camp, things grew colder. Vera withdrew, spending more time with her council, less with Joran. He told himself it was for the best, boundaries, protocol, all that, but the nights felt longer without her voice beside him. Then came the second twist, deeper, darker. While analyzing the core shard's energy patterns, Vera discovered something hidden in its resonance. A map. Not of Vexus Prime, but of a buried structure deep beneath the southern dunes. A Velari sanctuary, sealed for generations. According to her people's oldest texts, it housed the Elthar, the first shard, from which all others were born. But the texts also warned, he who wakes the Elthar wakes the sleeper. Joran didn't understand until the ground trembled. Not an earthquake. Something deliberate, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Scouts reported movement in the southern wastes. Massive, slow, emerging from the sands. Not machines, not animals, something else, ancient, enraged. The Velari elders panicked. The bond has disturbed the balance, one cried. The human presence has awakened what should have slept. Vera stood before them, defiant. The bond revealed the truth. The sleeper was never sleeping. It was waiting. Joran found her later that night, standing alone at the edge of camp, staring south. The wind tugged at her white hair like impatient fingers. They want me to annul the pact, she said without turning. To sever the blood oath. They say it's the only way to calm the sleeper. And what do you say? He asked, stepping beside her. She looked at him then, her storm-gray eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Fear? Yes, but also resolve. I say the sleeper doesn't want calm. It wants a choice, a successor. She paused. The Elthar doesn't just hold power, Joran. It holds memory, the memory of the first union between our peoples. Long before this war, long before we even knew each other's names, we were allies once. Then we forgot, and forgetting turned to fear. Fear turned to war. He stared at her, stunned. You're saying, we've done this before? Not us, she said softly, but souls like ours, and they failed. The weight of it settled over him like a burial shroud. This wasn't just about territory or resources. It was about breaking a cycle older than history. Before he could respond, alarms blared across camp. Red lights strobed against the salt flats. A scout came running, breathless. It's here, the sleeper, less than 5 clicks out. They raced to the command post. On the hollow display, a massive silhouette loomed. A creature of shifting stone and molten core, limbs like tectonic plates, eyes burning with primordial fire. It moved with terrifying purpose, straight toward the Hartwell Caverns. It's heading for the core, Vera realized. It wants to consume it, to become whole again. Joran's mind raced. Then we stop it before it gets there. How? Ren demanded. We've thrown everything at it. Plasma rounds, sonic charges. It just absorbs them. Vera's gaze fell on the core shard, glowing softly on the table. Not everything. Understanding dawned in Joran's eyes. The Elthar. We have to reach it first. It's suicide, Ren said flatly. The sanctuary's buried under a kilometer of unstable sand. Then we dig fast, Joran replied. Vera placed a hand on his arm. There's another way. The Hartwell tunnels extend south. There's a passage, one my people sealed centuries ago. But it's unstable. And guarded. By what? Joran asked. By the echoes of those who failed before us, she said quietly. Their regrets, their fears. The sleeper feeds on them. He didn't hesitate. Then we faced them together. As they prepared to leave, Mara limped into the command tent, her face pale but determined. I'm coming too, she said. Joran frowned. Mara, you can barely walk. I owe you my life, she said, meeting his eyes. And I owe her an apology. She looked at Vera. I was wrong. About you. Vera inclined her head, a silent acceptance. The three of them entered the southern tunnel at midnight, the air thick with the scent of ozone and old stone. The passage was narrow, walls slick with condensation that glowed faintly blue. Almost immediately, the visions began, not just personal fears, but shared ones. Joran saw Vera turning away from him, choosing her people over their bond. Vera saw Joran leading a Terran fleet to burn her homeworld. Mara relived the moment her squad died, screaming her name. But this time, they didn't face the visions alone. When Joran faltered, Vera gripped his hand. When Vera froze before a phantom of her fallen brother, Joran pulled her forward. And when Mara collapsed, sobbing, it was Vera who knelt beside her, placing a cool hand on her forehead and humming that old lullaby. Deeper they went, until the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, a cathedral of crystal and shadow. At its center, floating above a pool of liquid light, hung the Elthar. It was immense, pulsing with a slow, golden rhythm, its surface etched with symbols that shifted like living script. But between them and the shard stood the sleeper. Not the monster from the surface, but its true form. A towering figure of obsidian and starlight, its face a shifting mosaic of every Velari and human who had ever broken faith with the other. Its voice was a chorus of 1,000 broken oaths. "You come to claim what you do not understand," it intoned. "The Elthar chooses not by strength, but by sacrifice." Joran stepped forward. "We're not here to claim it. We're here to remember." The sleeper tilted its head. "Remember what?" "That we were never enemies," Vera said, joining him. "Only lost." A silence fell, heavy as stone. Then, slowly, the sleeper extended a hand. Not to strike, but to offer. In its palm lay 2 rings, forged from the same material as the core shard. "The bond must be renewed," it said. "Not in blood alone, but in truth. Will you wear them? Will you bear the weight of memory?" Joran looked at Vera. She looked back, her eyes filled with everything unsaid. Fear, hope, trust. "Yes," they said together. As they slipped the rings onto their fingers, the Elthar flared with blinding light. Knowledge flooded them. Not as words, but as feeling. The taste of shared bread on a long-dead world, the sound of laughter between Terran and Velari children, the quiet grief of separation, the stubborn hope of reunion. They saw the first war, not born of hatred, but of misunderstanding, of a single mistranslated word that spiraled into centuries of bloodshed. When the light faded, the sleeper was gone. The chamber hummed with peace, but outside the ground still trembled. The surface sleeper hadn't vanished, it had changed. It now stood between the 2 armies, not as a threat, but as a guardian. And as Joran and Vera emerged from the tunnel, hand in hand, rings glowing softly, they knew the real work was just beginning. For peace wasn't a treaty signed in blood. It was a choice made every day, in the way they looked at each other, in the stories they told their people, in the bridges they built over old graves. And somewhere, deep beneath the desert, the Heartwell beat on. Stronger now, steadier, fed not by war, but by the fragile, fierce thing growing between a human commander and a white-haired warrior who had once been strangers, then allies, and now something more. Something that might just save them all. The days that followed the awakening of the Elthar were unlike any Vexus Prime had known in centuries. The great stone sleeper, now called Kael'thar the Keeper, in the old tongue, stood sentinel over the Heartwell. Its once terrifying form softened into something almost serene, its molten eyes now glowing with a gentle amber light. The tremors ceased. The salt flats stopped humming with tension and began to breathe with something closer to peace. Even the twin suns seemed to burn a little kinder, casting golden halos over the joint encampment where Terrans and Velari now shared meals, stories, and watched shifts beneath the same sky. Joran and Vera hardly had a moment alone. Yet they found each other in glances across crowded strategy tables, in the brush of hands while passing tools, in the quiet laughter that escaped when one mimicked the other's accent. The rings they wore, forged from the Elthar itself, pulsed faintly whenever they were near, a silent echo of the bond that now ran deeper than oath or blood. It was no longer just a political alliance. It was something alive, growing like the first green shoots pushing through the salt-crusted earth near the Heartwell. A miracle no one had believed possible. But peace, they quickly learned, demanded more than truces. It demanded ceremony, symbol, a story the people could carry in their hearts. It was Elder Nasara, once Vera's fiercest critic, who proposed it during a council held beneath the twin moons. "The land remembers," she said, her voice softer than before. "And so must we. Let the Union be made whole, not in shadow but in light, not as strategy but as truth." Joran had nearly choked on his ration bar. "You mean, an actual wedding?" Vera had looked at him then, her storm-gray eyes dancing with something between amusement and tenderness. "Only if you're not afraid of Velari vows. They're rather binding." He'd grinned. "After facing a planet-sized grump made of regret, I think I can handle a few vows." Preparations began at once, though neither side had much to spare. The Terrans salvaged silk from emergency parachutes and polished scrap metal into ceremonial clasps. The Velari wove luminous threads from moonmoth cocoons and shaped singing crystals into arches that chimed with every breeze. Children from both camps, once taught to fear each other, now raced across the flats together, weaving flower crowns from the rare desert blooms that had begun to appear since the Heartwell's awakening. The wedding was set for the night of the twin convergence, when both moons aligned directly above the Heartwell caverns. a celestial event that occurred only once every 70 years. It was said that on such nights, the veil between memory and future grew thin, and ancestors walked among the living. On that evening, the shattered expanse was transformed. Lanterns of captured starlight floated above the salt flats, casting pools of silver and gold. A path of polished obsidian stones, salvaged from the sleeper's discarded shell, led to a dais built over the Hartwell's main vent, where warm, iridescent mist curled like incense. The air smelled of petrichor and something sweet, like crushed starberries. Joran wore a uniform refitted with Velari embroidery, silver thread tracing constellations across his shoulders. His boots were polished, his hair combed, a rare sight, and for once, he didn't crack a single joke. He stood at the edge of the dais, heart hammering like a drum, as the first notes of the Velari wedding chant rose into the air. A melody made of wind, crystal, and human strings played by a Terran violinist who'd once bombed Velari outposts. Then she appeared. Vera walked toward him in a gown spun from living moonlight fiber, so fine it seemed to float around her like mist. Her white hair was braided with strands of Terran red thread, Joran's idea, a symbol of two worlds woven together. Around her neck hung the core shard, now set in a pendant that glowed in time with her heartbeat. She carried no weapon, only a single white desert bloom in her hand. When she reached him, she didn't speak. She simply took his hands in hers, and the rings on their fingers flared with soft, golden light. The crowd, 100 strong, Terran and Velari side by side, fell utterly silent. The ceremony was spoken in both tongues, translated not by machines, but by elders and lieutenants who had once been enemies. They spoke of balance, of memory, of choosing each other not despite their differences, but because of them. When it came time for vows, Joran cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know much about forever," he began, "but I know I want to spend it learning yours. I promise to laugh with you, even when the world is burning. To listen, even when I think I already know the answer. And to never, ever make marriage jokes during negotiations again." A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd, and Vera squeezed his hands, her eyes shining. Then she spoke, her voice clear as mountain ice. "I vow to stand with you not as a commander, but as a partner. To share my silence and my song. To remember that peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of us." She paused, then added, so only he could hear, "And to never let you drink ration coffee again. It's terrible." He laughed, tears in his eyes. As the final vow was spoken, the Hartwell beneath them surged, not with violence, but with joy. A column of light erupted from the vent, swirling around them in a spiral of gold and silver, lifting petals and dust into a dance that mirrored the twin moons above. The core shard and the Elthar, now fused into a single relic, floated between them, pulsing like a shared heartbeat. When the light settled, the crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in something deeper. A unified chant, Terran and Velari voices blending into a single harmony that hadn't been heard on this world in generations. Afterward, there was feasting. Terran synth stew simmered beside Velari crystal fruit nectar. Ren arm-wrestled a Velari scout and lost spectacularly. Mara, her leg healed, danced with Elder Nasara under the moons. And Joran and Vera, newly wed, newly whole, slipped away from the celebration, not to escape, but to witness. They stood on the ridge where they'd first talked of oceans and snow, now blooming with tiny white flowers. The desert stretched before them, no longer shattered, but healing. "You know," Joran said, slipping an arm around her waist, "I still can't believe you said yes to the marriage. To me." Vera leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "I didn't say yes to a joke, Joran Vale. I said yes to the man who faced his fears in a living mountain, who carried his friend through sandstorms, who listened when my people needed to be heard." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the twin moons. "I said yes to the one who made me believe that love isn't weakness. It's the bravest weapon we have." He kissed her then, beneath the aligned moons, as the Hartwell hummed its ancient song of unity below. And in that kiss, two worlds didn't just meet. They became one. Years later, historians would call it the Convergence Accord. Poets would write of the White Warrior and the Laughing Commander. Children would play at reenacting the trial of twin sons. But those who were there knew the truth. Peace didn't begin with treaties or battles won. It began with a reckless joke in the desert, a moment of courage, and the quiet, stubborn choice to say yes, not just to survival but to each other. And on Vexus Prime, where twin suns rose over fields of white desert blooms and children of mixed blood played beneath singing crystal arches. That choice echoed still, forever.